Hello, beautiful people. It's Lulu. So I want to ask you, what happens the day after you break your streak? The day after you fail? When that workout routine, meditation practice, or creative project you were so committed to suddenly stops. That moment when the voice whispers in your head, "See, you always fail. You always quit. Just another thing you couldn't stick with." I feel you. I've been in exactly that place. And today we're tackling the one thing nobody really talks about: how to rebuild when consistency breaks down. What to do when you fail, miss a day, a week, a month. But here's the twist. We're not just talking about consistency. We're talking about the bridge from consistency to habits and the exact shifts you need to make so that falling off doesn't mean you stop altogether. And we are going to look at the real truth about this experience, because every single one of us goes through it. Welcome to the Lulu Essey podcast, where we do things differently. There is no editing here, and I mean no editing, and no polish. These are real, raw, honest conversations that give you practical tools to transform your life from the inside out. First, I want to thank everyone who reached out after last week's episode. Your messages about how the 15-minute tiny promise resonated with you are incredible. I heard from so many of you who have already started implementing it in your lives. Now, let me own something before we move on. And this made me laugh. After listening back to episode 16, I noticed something. I got really excited about neural pathways and those 15 minutes, and I may have mentioned them about 47 times. But hey, when something changes your life, you want to share it with anyone who will listen, right? So today I promise to be more concise as we build on what we talked about last week. If you haven't listened to episode 16 yet, you might want to check that out first. But don't worry, I'll give you the quick highlights right now. So last week we broke down why consistency is not about perfection or massive action. It's about small, doable actions that fit into your real life. We explored how tiny, focused commitments, just 15 minutes, can rewire your brain for success. We also talked about tracking wins rather than misses, which again rewires your brains for success. And today we're taking all of this a step further. How do we turn consistency into a habit? Have you ever wondered why some things you do still feel like work, even after weeks of doing them regularly, while other habits seem to just happen on autopilot? Or why it's sometimes so hard to stick with something, even when you really, really want to? I'm sure you've had this feeling, and that's exactly why I'm going to dive into something I promised last week: the critical difference between consistency and habits. The distinction is so important because understanding it will save you months, maybe even years of frustration. Here's a simple truth. Consistency requires conscious effort, while habits happen automatically. Consistency is when you deliberately choose to show up and take an action again and again. It requires intention, decision-making, and sometimes a little bit of willpower. You have to think about it. A habit, on the other hand, is when that action becomes so ingrained that it happens almost on autopilot. You don't have to make a decision. You just do it. Like brushing your teeth or checking your phone first thing in the morning. Not that I think that is a good habit. In fact, I think it's a habit you could really do without. And I want to be really honest here because this really matters. This part used to drive me crazy. I remember thinking, how do people make habits look so damn effortless? What's wrong with me? I would get so frustrated asking myself, why isn't this easier yet? Why does it still feel so damn hard? And then I learned something that changed everything. Effort is part of the process. The transition from consistency to habit is not seamless. It's clunky and uncomfortable before it becomes automatic. The reality is that consistency is this bridge to habits, but crossing that bridge takes time. Research suggests it takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days for a behavior to become automatic, with the average being around 66 days. Now that's a lot longer than the 21 days we've all heard about. Okay, now don't freak out. We've got this. You know, on this podcast, I give practical tools that are doable in everyday life. And this is exactly why the 15-minute tiny promise is so damn powerful. It's small enough that you can consistently show up for it, giving your brain the repetition it needs to eventually form a habit. But you need to be patient with the process and understand that the effort is normal and necessary. And now I know effort has become a kind of a dirty word because everyone is looking for effortless transformation. But my life has shown me, and the science proves it, that effort is needed. You have to be willing to show up, and I know that you are. So pause right now. Just pause for a moment and think about one area where you've been consistent but haven't yet formed a habit. Maybe it's meditation, exercise, writing, journaling, or something else. Take a few seconds to identify that area. What's making it still feel like work rather than an automatic part of your day? For me, it was delaying my caffeine intake. I decided to adopt a practice I learned from Andrew Huberman about waiting 60 to 90 minutes after waking up before having coffee. In the beginning, I was so frigging clumsy with it. For weeks, I kept checking the time. Is it time for coffee yet? I'd wonder constantly. It required conscious thought and effort every single morning. But after a few months of consistency, it became automatic. I no longer even think about it. My body and my brain just naturally follow that rhythm. And that's the difference between consistency and habit. I cross that bridge through repetition. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get said enough, and I wish more people would talk about it. Growth means you have to go further than where you started. Growth means learning to stretch, and sometimes stretching feels uncomfortable and awkward before it feels right. Remember when I told you about my 15-minute tiny promise for the podcast? Well, that's absolutely how I started. I committed to 15 minutes a day of podcast-related work. But here's the reality. As the podcast evolved from an idea to an actual show, that 15 minutes naturally grew pretty dramatically. So it's very important for me to be very clear with you about this. And I'll be real. I struggled with this. I had to unlearn the idea that if I couldn't keep it at 15 minutes, I was failing. But I know that growth means adjusting. I love this podcast, but it requires so much more than 15 minutes a day now. And that's completely okay. The 15-minute promise is a launch pad. It's not the destination. It's the minimal, doable commitment that gets you started and builds that momentum. But as you progress, as your project or your habit or your skill evolves, your time commitment will likely need to grow also. You'll know it's time when the 15 minutes starts to feel like you want and you need more. When you naturally want to continue rather than feeling relieved when the timer goes off. This doesn't invalidate the 15-minute approach. It actually validates it because starting small is what allows you to begin in the first place. And beginning is the key, and often people don't start. They don't begin because it feels overwhelming. But this practice helps you overcome your initial paralysis and resistance. And once you're moving and grooving, once you've built that initial momentum, increasing your time investment becomes so much easier. We spoke about music in the last episode. Well, think about learning to play an instrument. You might start with a 15-minute practice daily. But as you improve and maybe you're preparing for a performance, you will naturally want to practice for longer. This natural evolution is something to embrace, not resist. It's a sign of growth, not a sign that the 15-minute approach failed. The key is recognizing when you are ready to expand beyond those 15 minutes and doing so intentionally, not out of a sense of I should do this or feeling pressure. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room, the one we mentioned in episode 16 and that I promised to talk about today. What happens when you fail? What happens when you miss a day, a week, or even a month of your consistent practice? First, can we please make this okay? Missing a day does not erase your progress. Missing a week doesn't mean you've lost everything. What matters is that you come back. Everyone, and I mean everyone, misses sometimes. Even the most disciplined people you know have gaps, even if they're tiny gaps, in their consistency. The difference isn't that they never miss a day, it's in how quickly they come back. Remember what I said last week? The most consistent people aren't the ones who never miss a day. They're the ones who know how to come back when they do. So how do we come back? How do we do it? Here are 3 practical steps that have helped me recover from breaks in consistency. First, drop the story. When we miss a day, our brains love to create dramatic narratives. I always fail at everything. I knew I couldn't do this. I'm just not a consistent person. Notice these stories with curiosity and gently set them aside. They're just thoughts, not facts. And I will tell you right now, this is a big one for me. My brain seems to love big, dramatic stories. And I have a natural talent for making those stories up. Second step, start smaller than before. If you were doing 15 minutes and fell off track, come back with 5 minutes. Remove all the friction, all the things that make you want to not start, and make restarting as easy as possible. You can always build back up. Third, and this is crucial, track your comeback as a win. The day you return to your practice after a break is actually more important than any other day of showing up. It's proof of your resilience, and it deserves to be celebrated. And I'll share a personal example. Earlier on, a few months ago, I was really consistent with my morning meditation practice. I had been consistent for about 2 months. Then I had my foot surgery, and for weeks, I didn't meditate at all. When I started feeling better though, my inner critic went berserk. See, you always quit things. You were doing so well, and now you've messed it all up. What a loser. What a quitter. But instead of believing that story, I chose a different approach. I set a timer for just 3 minutes, not my usual 15, and I just got to it. They weren't the best meditations, but that wasn't the point. The point was coming back, and I tracked it as a massive win. It was a big moment for me. So now it's your turn. Think about the last time you failed at being consistent with something important to you. What's one thing that could have helped you restart sooner? Take a few seconds just to think about this. And here's something powerful to remember. The path of consistency is very seldom a straight line. It's more like a spiral. And it's not just any spiral, it's an upward spiral where each loop takes you higher than the last. You circle around, sometimes coming places you've been before. But you're never in exactly the same spot. You're always bringing new awareness, new experiences, new growth, new magic with you. Beauties, let's bring this all together. Today we've explored the critical difference between consistency and habits, understanding that consistency requires conscious effort, while habits are automatic, and that the journey from one to the other often takes more time than we expect. And that is not a reason to freak out. Remember, this is all doable. We've talked about how the 15-minute tiny promise is a starting point that naturally evolves and you grow and you progress in your journey. And most importantly, we've made it absolutely okay to fail, to miss a day, a week, a month, because we embrace failure here. We don't run away from it. We learn from it. And I have given you practical tools to come back, not if, but when you fall off track. This all matters because true transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens through these small, consistent actions, through understanding our process, through coming back after failures, and through honoring our own unique journey. You get to do this beautiful thing called life your way. Next week, we'll explore another crucial aspect of consistency: how to stay inspired and engaged when the initial excitement fades. Because let's be honest, the beginning of any journey is filled with whoa, excitement and energy. But what happens when the honeymoon phase ends? The real challenge: sticking with it when the novelty wears off. And I've got some really game-changing insights to share with you and practical tools to help you when the journey gets hard, because it will. So, if this episode spoke to you, DM me with the word comeback and tell me how you're getting back on track. I love hearing your stories. They inspire me and they'll inspire someone else too. DM me on Instagram. And if you haven't already, please take a second to rate this podcast. It helps people find these tools and start their own transformation. And share this episode with friends, family, your colleagues. Let's grow this together. Go on, share it now. And as always, what comes from the heart reaches the heart. And today, like every other day, with consistency and intention, this comes straight from my heart to yours.